All right, so we are going to do some practice problems this morning, just a little bit more with factor by grouping. So, factor by grouping. And so factoring by grouping is really specific. It is going to look for, turn my ringer off. It's going to look for very specific problems. So the problems that you are going to be working with today only come in the form of a 4-term polynomial. All right, so it has to have 4 terms because we're going to group it. We're going to split it in half. And that's why it's important that it has 4 terms. My hair is a little out of control right there. So in order to factor by grouping, first we look for, let's put number 1. Is there a GCF? Right? Is there a GCF in the whole problem? If there is, we take that out. The second thing that we do is we split it in half. And that's where that 4 term comes in, right? It has to have 4 terms because we want to have an even number up front and an even number at back. We want to have 2 and 2. And then we find the GCF of each half. And then, so once we first are looking to see, is there a main GCF that can come out? And usually there's a main GCF when our numbers are outside of 100, right? When it's greater than 100. Then we're going to split it in half. We're going to take the 4 terms and we're going to put them in groups of 2, right? So the first 2 and the second 2. And then once it's split in half, we are going to find the GCF of each half. That didn't really help, but oh well. Everything's backwards in this video. I can't tell what's going on. Okay, so let's just start. I'm going to be writing over here. All right, so my first problem that I'm going to do, and these are our steps that we're going through, okay? And have your factor squares so that you can have a little bit of ease in doing these. So we're going to look at 30x to the third minus 18x squared plus 25x minus 15. So I'm going to look and I'm going to see, does anything share a common factor? So the fastest way to do this is to look at the smallest number. So the smallest coefficient is 15, negative 15, but we're going to just pretend that it's positive to just talk about factors. So my factors of 15 are 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. And if I always go to my smallest number to look for the greatest, then that alleviates a whole bunch of stuff because like 30 can be divided by 10, but 15 can't be divided by 10. So if I always go to my smallest coefficient to try to find the greatest number, that's sometimes helpful. So biggest number is 15, 25, 18 can't be divided by 15, so I forget about it. 5. 25 can be divided by 5. 18 cannot be divided by 5. 3. 25 can't be divided by 3. So the greatest common factor that they all have in common is 1. So there is no overall greatest common factor. So step number 1, is there a big GCF in this problem? No. Step number 2 is split it in half. So I'm going to go up here and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, and I'm going to split it in half right there. Remembering that that positive sign belongs to that 25, that plus sign. And so now, after I've split it in half, I'm going to find the GCF of each half. Right? I'm looking for the GCF of each half. So I'm looking here, and I'm going to write it all out. you don't have to show all this work when you do it. You could use your factor squares. In fact, you should be using your factor squares, right? Factor squares, right here, right? And so 18, if I'm looking at my numbers, right? 18 can be divided by 1 and 18, 2 and 9, and 3 and 6, right? 30 can be divided by 1 and 30, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. So what's the greatest number that they have in common? They share, the biggest number is 6. They also share 3, but we don't care about that because there's a bigger value that they share. I can also look and see that here are 1, 2, 3 x's, and here are 1 and 2 x's, right? And again, we're looking for how many do they share? Well, they share 1, and they share 2. So the greatest common factor of this first half is 6x squared. Because they can both be divided by 6, the biggest number that they can both be divided by is 6, and they also share an x squared. So 30 divided by 6 is 5, and x to the third divided by x squared is x. Right? So again, I can show that down here. I'm taking this first half and I'm dividing it by the greatest common factor that we found. 30 divided by 6 is 5. X to the third divided by x squared is x. Negative 18 divided by 6 is negative 3. And x squared divided by x squared cancels out. So this first half right here factors into this. The greatest common factor of those two terms is 6x squared. And then this is the leftover, right? I'm taking that part out so that I can write my solution. Now I'm going to go over to the second half. 25 is 5 and 5 and 1 and 25. And 15 is 1 and 15 and 3 and 5. What's the biggest number that they have in common? The biggest factor that they have in common is 5. There's an x in this term, but there's not an x in this term, so they do not share a variable. So I'm going to take this half, 25x minus 15, this half right here, and I'm going to divide it by 5 because that's my GCF. My GCF is 5. 25 divided by 5, right? So my GCF goes in front. 25 divided by 5 is 5. There's no x in here, so I leave an x. And negative 15 divided by 5 is negative 3. And I know that I factored correctly because my leftover pieces match. So my answer to this problem is GCF1 and GCF2. So 6x squared, and this is a positive 5. And then one of my leftovers, because my leftovers match. So I'm good to go. We're going to do another one. Again, have your notes out that you took so that you can follow those steps around with us. I'm going to erase this just so that I can have some more work room over here. So again, factor squares are important. And our notes over this. So let me find my factor by grouping. right? So my factor by grouping, I have my 5 steps that I need to follow, okay? Have those out while we're working through these problems. Let's do it over here. 32b to the third minus 8b squared plus 20b minus 5. Okay, so let's talk this one through. To find my overall GCF, I'm going to look for the smallest value, right? So 32, negative 8, but really positive 8 because we're looking at factors. 25. Okay, so 5 is my smallest value. Factors of 5 are 1 and 5. That's it. It's prime. Can 20 be divided by 5? Yes. Can 8 be divided by 5? No. So there is no GCF in this problem. All right. So I'm going to split it in half. And when I split it in half, I'll turn this a little bit so I have more. I'm going to factor each half. So 8 can be divided by 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. Right? I'm listing my factors of these numbers. 32 can be divided by 1 and 32. What else is it? 2 and 16. And 4 and 8. So I'm looking to see biggest number that they share, right? Always start with the smaller one because it's going to help you narrow it down faster. Can be divided by 8 and can be divided by 8. So the greatest common factor, the greatest number it can be divided by is 8. Now they also both have variables. So I have 1, 2, 3 B's here and 1, 2 B's here. So how many do they share? 1, 2. So my greatest common factor for this first half is 8b squared. I'm not combining both of them. I'm seeing what do they share. So my greatest common factor is 8b squared. Now I'm going to take each of these terms and divide it by the greatest common factor. 32 divided by 8 is 4. B to the third divided by b squared is b. Negative 8 divided by 8 is negative 1. And b squared divided by b squared cancels out. So I factored the first half. I found the GCF of the first half, and I factored that GCF out. So this is my problem. If I was going to distribute this, I would get this answer up here. Going over to the second half to factor. Start with a smaller one, 1 and 5, right? 20 is 1 and 20, 2 and 10, and 4 and 5. What's the greatest number that they share? Is 5. There's a variable here, but there's not a variable here. So they do not have a common variable. So my greatest common factor for the second half is 5. They can both be divided by 5. So I'm going to put 5 here. And then I'm going to divide and see what's left behind. 20 divided by 5 is 4. There's a b with it, not a b here, so the b comes along. And negative 5 divided by 5 is negative 1. And you notice the leftovers match. If the leftovers match, we're there. We're able to write our answer, our solution. So my final answer is GCF number 1 plus GCF number 2, 8b squared plus 5, and 4b minus 1, one of the leftovers. Gonna do a couple more. All right, here we go. Down a little bit. Let's do one with the greatest common factor. So 20v to the third plus 160v squared. And this is why I think that there's a greatest common factor, because I have 160. Like, that's a pretty big number. It's got a lot of factors, so the chances of having something that matches is going to be pretty high. Minus 4v minus 32. All right, so again, greatest common factors for the whole problem, go with the smallest number first. So make the list of factors, look for the factors of the smallest value. So I have 20, 160, 4, negative 4, and 32, negative 32. But when we look at factors, we're just looking for the positive value of the factors. So this is 1 and 4 and 2 and 2, right? So can 20 be divided by 4? Yes. Can 32 be divided by 4? Yes. Can 160 be divided by 4? I don't know. Can it? Grab a calculator. Check it out. Can it? It can. So I know that all 4 of these have a GCF of 4. So I'm going to put a 4, and then I'm going to figure out what's left behind. 20v to the third divided by 4 is 5v to the third. 160v squared divided by 4, right, is what? 40v squared. Negative 4v divided by 4 is negative 1v. You don't need that 1. It's okay. Doesn't hurt anything. And negative 32 divided by 4 is negative 8. All right, so I looked and I found a GCF. I'm going to circle this outside GCF that I just took out. I'm going to draw an arrow down to the bottom that reminds me to put that back into my problem. So now I'm going to split it in half. And I'm going to look for the GCF of the first half and factor that out. Then I'm going to go on to the second half and find the GCF of the second half and factor that out. Start with a smaller value, just 1 and 5. Can 40 be divided by 5? Yes. There's also a V, and a V. So the greatest common factor, there's 5, right? This can be divided by 5. And V squared and V to the third, they share 2 V's, so it's V squared. All right, if I wanted to write these factors, 1, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. Greatest number that they share is 5. And again, you can find that by looking at your factor squares, right? Just look at your where am I going? Look at your factor squares. All of those factors are listed inside those boxes. So my greatest common factor is 5v squared. So 5v to the third divided by 5v squared. 5 divided by 5 is 1. V to the third divided by v squared is v. You don't have to have that 1 there. Just write v, that's fine. Add the 1 in, doesn't change anything. 40 divided by 5 is 8. I'm going to take it away because it's throwing my brain off. And v squared divided by v squared cancels out. So I factored my first half. Let's do the second half. GCF back here. Well, first problem, I'm starting with a negative. So I need to factor out that negative. I need to factor out a negative, right? Leaving behind 1v plus 8. And are there any GCFs, any greatest common factors of 1 and 8? No, just 1, right? So my GCF is negative 1, and that leaves behind v plus 8. My answer is GCF number 1 and GCF number 2. And one of the leftovers. Don't forget, I drew this arrow to remind me I took out a greatest common factor of 4 at the beginning, so I need to add that 4 to the front of the problem. Let's do one more. $50x to the third minus 10x squared plus 25x minus 5. So let's see, is there a GCF? Smallest value is 5. 5 can be divided by 1 and 5. Can it be divided by 5? Yes. Divided by 5? Yes. Divided by 5? Yes. So I have a GCF of 5. No variable, because they don't all have variable terms. So let's rewrite our problem. 50x to the third divided by 5 is 10x to the third. Negative 10x squared divided by 5 is negative 2x squared. 25x divided by 5, positive 5x. And negative 5 divided by 5 is negative 1. I'm going to draw this. I'm going to put it down to the bottom so that I don't forget to put that in my original answer. Split it in half time. I'm looking for the GCF up here. And you're going to get to the point that this is going to get easier, that you don't have to write out the factors. If you need to write out the factors, totally fine, still do it. We have 1 and 10, and 2 and 5, and x, and x, right? And here is just 1 and 2, and x. So what's the biggest number that they both share? Is 2. And do they share any variables? So my GCF is 2x squared. 10x to the third divided by 2x squared. 10 divided by 2 is 5. X to the third divided by x squared is x. Negative 2x squared divided by 2x squared. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. And x squared divided by x squared cancels out. And I'm coming to the back half, and I'm going to factor this back half. GCFs here are 1 and 5 and x, right? And 1 is 1 and 1. So what's the biggest number that they both share? 1. Right? And they don't even share variables. 5x divided by 1 is 5x. And negative 1 divided by 1 is negative 1. My answer is GCF number 1 and GCF number 2, positive 1, and a leftover. I drew this arrow at the beginning to remind myself that we factored out a greatest common factor. Hopefully that helps a little bit more. If you need more practice with factor by grouping, again, I'll put that up here just so that you remember this is factor by grouping. Happy Saturday morning with math, guys. If you have any questions, please email me. Maybe we can set up a WebEx to get on and do some math problems together. Up to you, but reach out if you have questions. Factoring by grouping, big steps. Is there overall GCF? Take that out. Has to have 4 terms. Split it in half. Right? Split it in half. Factor each half. So GCF for each half. The cool thing is that when you do this, right, and it's going to work, your leftover parts should match. That's how you know that you're factoring correctly. And then your answer is GCF number 1 plus GCF number 2 times one of the leftovers. This one had a GCF and overall GCF, so I have to remember to bring that down. But again, factor squares. Look at your notes. I think there are some disconnect that we're not writing down the notes, which is, this is a different time in schooling. But I think there is a really big connection between writing them down and really understanding what's going on. So I really recommend writing those notes. My cat's coming. There she is. Writing down those notes, and it really helps you think and remember it better. But until next time.